Okay, so yeah, I'm just going to read it out, actually. I'm not going to show you the list. In number 1, I had Violet, right? I think that's incredibly reasonable. Actually, fuck it. Let's make this a proper video. Let me go through it. Let me go through it here with you. Because, oh no, I really should make this video properly once I've listened to the Plat Chat episode so that I know what their reasons were as well. No, I'm going to do it now, actually. I'm going to do it now. Because Plat Chat fucked up, okay? Plat Chat done goofed. They didn't have me on for an episode, and they let Avast and Custer in the same room talking about flex supports, and we saw Jonathan put wins on his list last time. So I just knew it was going to go wrong, okay? I knew it was going to go wrong. Thankfully, I still got a vote, at least, but I wasn't there to try and kind of shout down the idiocy that I knew would happen. I mean, half of it's going to come from me as well. But I actually think in terms of these lists, I've done an all right job at it. Now, there is one... There are 2 picks that just got outside of the top 10 that are crazy for me. At least I think they're a bit nuts. In my opinion, after the top 10, when it comes to greatest of all time flex supports, you're either picking people that have been in the game for a long time but weren't actually that amazing, or you're picking people that have only been in the game for like a year but were really good for a year, right? Like that's what you're picking. You're picking between those 2 extremes. So number 1 on my list was Violet. I think Violet, even though he doesn't win by a long shot, I actually thought it was crazy close between number 1 and number 2, in my opinion, but I still put Violet number 1. The reason being, I think he's the most impactful Zen and Batiste player we've ever had in the league. His peaks have been utterly, actually championship winning. His peaks of performance took shock to those double trophies. I think with a weaker or even just an average flex support player, they absolutely don't win those trophies. And the way in which they built around Violet's ability to frag from that position was instrumental to their playstyle when winning those trophies as well. So I think Violet's been nuts on that. Are there downsides to Violet though? Absolutely. Like his 2021 season was marred. It was something that I brought up constantly whilst casting him in 2021 actually, was the fact that even though everyone knows he's great, you do hurt your GOAT legacy kind of stuff when he's out there playing like Mercy, Lucio, Cassidy, Echo, like these kind of hero picks that just make him look like he's not incredible, like he's not being set up to succeed. Those do detract, and so I don't think he had an amazing 2021 season, but he was still very good when he was playing his normal heroes. And the other argument against Violet 2 is that he's not the most well-rounded flex support player, right? Like, for example, they had, I think it was like Architect playing Ana in, what season would that be? I think that was that 2019 at some point when they were trying, like, towards the latter half of the season, trying to play some Ana? Or was that 2021? I can't even remember. That was 2020? Yeah. Okay. Oh, the start of 2020, right? Yeah, I can't exactly remember when it was, but I'll trust you guys there. But anyway, yeah, there was instances like that, right? Where, oh, of course it was. Yeah, it was the start of 2020 because it was homestands. I was talking to Super at the homestand in Dallas about the fact that they weren't going to be running Violet. Yes, of course. Yeah, I forgot about that. But I think certainly over time, Violet's been able to shore that up. I think the other part of it too is whenever he was out there playing like Brig, which maybe you could say is a main support hero, but I think also has to be factored in when we're talking about flex supports because it's part of your role sometimes is to be able to pick up Brig. It's something that Alarm did, for example, as well. Skewed, of course, although one could argue whether Skewed really is a flex support player at this point. But anyway, the point is, I think Brig is an important factor into that as well. And Violet's Brig was nutty when he was playing it. So all of these things together, to me, put Violet in the lead, marginally over my number 2. And my number 2 would be Alarm. I think Alarm is the the best all-round flex support player in the game. Or rather was the best all-round flex support player in the game. That still is... still hurts me to say that. He essentially had no holes in his game. He didn't have a hero that he was bad at, and he could carry legitimately from any of them. When he moved over to Brig, when he was playing in the... I think that was the 2020 Summer Showdown when they were playing against Paris. Alarm's Brig was just nuts. His Zen has always been fantastic. His Ana is elite as well. His BAP has been fabulous. Like, he's just got everything. The thing that stops him, in my opinion, from being in that number one position is essentially the limited career playing within Overwatch League, because he was too young to be able to play in it for a large amount of time. And the fact that this season, the Philadelphia Fusion couldn't really do too much. Like, they were hamstrung, and so that does hurt him too, because you couldn't see his ceiling all the time. You saw that he was a monster. I mean, in the games, he was nuts. He was having massive performances, but he's limited, or he was limited by the circumstances, and so you don't get to see the same thing with like Violet in 2019, 2020, where the team around him is so excellent that you get to see Violet at his peak, dominating the competition, being able to win them back-to-back trophies. Alarm had limited sample size because of his youth, even though it was incredible. So to me, he gets that number 2 position. Wasn't able to, really get that win under his belt that you need to be able to be the GOAT, in my opinion. But I think he does win the all-round. If you're ranking flexibility as your number one thing, I think you have to put Alarm number 1. In fact, perhaps you could even argue you're putting Izayaki at number 1 or something like that, but, that would be a different list. But Alarm, absolute elite player, a true legend of the game, and one of the greatest of all time. In number 3, I actually had Twilight. I don't know where the other people ranked him particularly, but this is where I had Twilight. I think the years that he was playing for Runaway, so let me make sure that I get the years correct. So the latter 2/3 half of 2018 and then 2019, they were dominating the contender circuit to the point where you can feel confident they would be doing at least top 5 in Overwatch League at that end portion of 2018. I mean, they were just nuts. They were amazing. So I don't take that away from Twilight. I think, that's still fantastic achievement to be that good. And then in 2019, his positioning was simply perfect. He played with bumper. Just going to say that again. He was the flex support playing with bumper, and managed to position himself perfectly to turn what would be an extraordinarily aggressive, potentially feeding playstyle into actually carrying. The stuff that they were doing in that season, especially towards the beginning of it, and how they were getting Twilight set up into these great positions, and how they had the comms structure to be able to peel for him as well. And that isn't just your team being good to peel for you. That's also what Twilight was doing in those positions, like how he was pathing to make sure his team could cover him, and how he was saving his utility too. Just amazing Ana play. And then also when he played for the San Francisco Shock in those later seasons, he looked nuts as well. When he actually got playtime, he still looked incredible. He can't be number 1 or number 2, though, in my opinion, because he just didn't have the same level of playtime as somebody like Alarm, somebody like Violet. But I do, perhaps controversially, have him over Izayaki and Jonak, who are my next 2 picks in that order. So let's talk about Izayaki, because I've got Jonak in 5th here. And even I thought that might be a little unfair to Jonak. But I think Izayaki has to edge it out over Jonak, in my opinion. So the reason that I've got Izayaki in 4th as well is that he just has a cupboard full of trophies. He has trophy, all while being the single flex support for the Shanghai Dragons. You could argue, yeah, they technically had backup flex supports with like Molly and stuff at various times, but Izayaki is hyper consistent, quiet, but insanely deadly on a really flexible across the board as well. And his development has been fantastic. He's actually got a pretty long career, but I think you can only start to credit him as a top flex support player after he had that period of time on the Valiant. I think when he was playing for the Valiant, he still looked like he had a lot of holes in his game, pretty rough. That team wasn't great as well, but he didn't have that same level of thought process in terms of what he was doing when he was playing those flex supports. But his ability to fend for himself in the backline of the Shanghai Dragons when Lee Jae-gon is off doing his own shit is something that doesn't get talked about enough. This guy is not getting carried by his team to the degree that the community seems to think. Izayaki slips under the radar a lot, I think, because he's not the best player on the team. Like Violet at some point has been the best player on the Shock. Alarm has been the best player on the Fusion. Could you argue Twilight has been the best player on like that runaway Vancouver Titans team? Probably not. I don't think that would have been reasonable when Hacksaw was on the team. But perhaps he would be higher up the list than Izayaki. Maybe those are quite comparable. But Izayaki performs a really crucial role for that team because of how aggressively his main support plays. And he's very, very skilled too. Plus, he just has tons of accolades, which you can debate how much those are his work. But I think if you replaced Izayaki with the person who's in the middle of my top 15, like what even would that be? 7th, 8th kind of player. If you replace him with my 8th player, I don't think they would have won those trophies. So I think it is important that you have an elite player in that flex support position, and Izayaki is elite. So then I go on to Jonak. Now, the reason that I have Izayaki above Jonak is that I think Izayaki's played better than Jonak since Izayaki became a great player. And I don't think that's particularly debatable, actually. I still think Jonak's been playing pretty well in 2019, 2020, 2021. But I don't think he's been on the same level as Izayaki, Shu, Violet, Alarm, Twilight, right? I think in terms of the impact he has in the server, for those years, he's been a bit behind those players. But Jonak has to be high on your list. He simply has to be, because he redefined what it meant to be a flex support player in 2018, especially Zenyatta play. He obliterated people in 2018. It was simply not close between him and the rest of the pack. And we haven't had a season like that since then. 2019, there wasn't you are hands down the best player in the league on flex support. You could argue that it was Violet, but I think the 2019, 2020, and 2021 seasons are much more debatable than 2018. And in fact, 2017, 2016 too. Jonak's Ana too doesn't get talked about enough. Jonak's Ana was still fucking bonkers, even when people were only talking about his Zen play. So you can't tell me that he was a Zen one trick or he fell off or any of that shit. He's still been really, really good. In 2019, he was extremely good. 2020, he was still a good part of that New York team. And 2021, the team was having struggles. Jonak looked a bit less coordinated with what they were trying to do. I didn't particularly like the way that he was trying to play his Moira, for example, but he was still good. He was still good. He just wasn't the best or top 3, or I'm trying to think if Jonak would have made top 5 in a flex support list of 2021. I think it's unlikely, but I haven't made the list myself, so I can't say for sure. Anyway, the decline was not as rapid as other people might have you believe. So you can't possibly list him outside of this kind of area, I think. So he's nuts. He's nuts. Then Here's my most controversial pick of this list. In 6th place, somebody that everybody else left off their lists for character reasons, which I completely understand. In 6th place, I have Ryu Jae-hong. And this is not to say that anything he's done whilst streaming or the actions he's taken have not been deplorable. That the stream stuff that he did for like, I don't even know what it was, like a month or something, seemed pretty heinous from the outside. But I decided when making these lists to draw quite an extreme line with including people. The reason being that I didn't want to get into the murky territory of trying to decide whether somebody who is rude, obnoxious, toxic, but not overtly bigoted would get in, but somebody that had one instance of saying something bigoted, but I don't know whether it's to do with ignorance or I don't speak their language and so I can't be too confident about the level of severity involved. I didn't want to get into that kind of place of trying to rule people in or rule people out. So I took quite an extreme line, like you've got to do something extremely fucking bad to get left off my list. So I decided to include Jae-hong here, which again is not an endorsement of his activities that he's been up to while streaming. So my little thing that I sent to Kurt was, Jae-hong has his place in history in Overwatch League for essentially inventing carry supports. He defined what it was to have that level of impact from the support position and essentially invented that style of play through his ability in 2016 and 2017. He was hands down the best player at the role in 2016 and 2017. And those 2 years of absolute dominance, plus him being good, average at worst, I would say, for the seasons that he played in OWL, book him a pretty high spot on this list. Because to me, when I'm thinking about greatest of all time, I'm thinking about legacy. I'm thinking about what you do to inspire the next wave of talent, whether you make a significant shift in the paradigms of how people think about your role because you're that, like, is your impact that outsized that you redefine how the role is being played? If so, like Jae-hong, like Jonak, you're going to shoot up the list compared to just your skill or just your accomplishments. I don't think it, yeah, and I agree with that, Cherry Creamsicle. I don't think it's possible to really, truly tell the story of Flex Supports and the evolution of it without talking about Jae-hong as well. And so I put him on my list, and if I was on the episode, I would have said, he's done some things that make me think he might be a bit of a piece of shit on stream recently. But what you can't remove what he's done for the game and for the position. So I've got him on my list here. So then I've got Shu at number 7. Now, if I was to order these players by skill, Shu would be way higher. The only reason that Shu is this low at the 7th best of all time is because he's been permanently limited by his teams up until the Gladiators of this year. And that was the first, not the first actually, sorry, the second, because the Guangzhou Charge did win the Summer Showdown in APAC in 2020. But Shu doesn't have the same trophy cabinet necessarily as the players above him. He doesn't have the same accomplishments, but he is so skilled that he gets in above many other players that have more accomplishments than him because he's nuts. He's been nuts since he joined the league as well. I don't know if you remember, like Zoe on the desk talking about the Shushu train back in 2019, I think, when he was playing with the Guangzhou Charge. And that Guangzhou Charge team was quite poo, but Shu was still looking amazing in his role there. And the better teams that he's been on, the more you can see the ceiling of this guy is extremely high. He's got a fuck ton of highlight clips, a throng of supporters that recognize how talented he is. He's just lacking the actual accomplishments in Overwatch 1 to move up the list. If Shu continues playing in Overwatch 2, he will rise up this list. If you're making a greatest of all time flex supports a few years from now, if Overwatch 3 comes out or something, you know, and we're doing this again 5 years from now, I would expect Shu to be in a much higher position if he carries on playing, because he's mega, mega, mega talented. I think Shu's extremely well-rounded. I think he's never really had like a bad tournament or a bad year. He's just been gatekept from the top portions of this GOAT list by playing on some pretty middling teams. And in times, I mean, in 2019, kind of a poor team that did all right at the end of the year. So it becomes difficult to justify his position much higher unless you're heavily weighting skill. So at number 8, my 8, 9, and 10 are also quite controversial, I would say. And number 8, for somewhat similar reasons to Jaehong, I've got Badoshin here as well. Another player that's had explosive relationships within Overwatch League teams and isn't viewed particularly kindly by the overall community. I can't actually remember whether he's done anything that would have stricken him off the list with other people. I can't fucking recall all of the stuff that all of the players have done over the years. But in terms of just talking about his player career, Badoshin, he has an extremely long career that a lot of people don't realize. He started out playing for WNV Korea, which was the first team that Krusty ever coached. They were a Korean team, or rather a team of Korean players that couldn't get a spot in Apex, and so they moved to China and obliterated in China. They were the number 1 team in China. They rolled all the other teams. They were insanely talented. I can't remember what the rest of the roster looked like at this point, but it had a couple of other really talented players on it as well. And yeah, so that he was extremely good, visibly talented all the way back then when he was playing in like I think that was at the end of 2016. I think WNV Korea might have started like October, November 2016, something like that. Then his career develops. In 2017, he had some good success. He was the second best support of 2018. I don't think that was particularly a debate at the time as well. It was Jonak, then it was Badoshin. He also won a championship while IGLing from that flex support position, which again is a massive achievement that nobody else, as far as I'm aware, has under their belt. I don't think Izzyaki or Violet contribute in that way to the comms. So Badoshin's alone in terms of having that that accomplishment that he was the IGL during that. So again, like I said, I wanted to draw a pretty extreme line in the sand when it comes to it, including as many people as possible just based on the story of the game itself rather than the players outside of the server. And I think Badoshin did a lot in his career early on to be able to get into this list. In number 9, I have Luffy. Don't know whether anyone else had them in their top 10, but when you look at the career of Luffy, he had a lot of... his career is not constant. Like, he wasn't constantly on top teams. Nobody had him. Yeah. I've got Luffy over Fielder. Fielder is my 10th. I'll give you a spoiler there. But for Fielder, I felt like there wasn't... for Fielder, there is actually like a year and a half of top level play. So you could argue I've been a little unfair to Fielder there. But Luffy's career has been extremely good. And Luffy has been playing for a long time as well. When you're talking about greatest of all time, I feel like a significant portion of that has to be taken into account the length of their career during Overwatch 1 as well. And Luffy's played for Runaway at some point, played for Kongdu Uncia, I believe, and Kongdu Panthera. Had really solid success prior to Overwatch League, and then translated that into a stage title with the Shanghai Dragons, where he was playing insanely well on Ana. Now, obviously, that's where the career ended. He didn't continue playing for Overwatch League teams, etc., etc. So he can't be high up the list. but he has had a long career speckled with extreme success. The parts in which he has played, he's been extremely successful. So he's had a consistently successful career over the span of many years, although not the most recent, most competitive years. So it's almost the exact opposite of somebody like Fielder, who wasn't playing at a competitive level prior to the middle of 2020, but then has just gone straight onto the scene. So Fielder, I think Fielder has to be in your top 10. For me, he's 10th because of the reasons that I've stated with the other players as well, because I've been taking longevity into account quite a lot. And I think Fielder's one of those other players like Shu, who, if you're looking back at this at the end of Overwatch 2, and he continues to play for some of those years, his stocks will go up. The only reason that Fielder is really limited here on this list is because of his short career in Overwatch League so far. It's only been a year and a half. He didn't even play for the whole year with Paris. But the ping king, I mean, he was nuts on high ping for the Paris Eternal. Insanely good flex support player. Got, in fact, underrated, in my opinion, because of how good he was on high ping. I was so excited for this guy to play in 2021. And I feel like he slipped on the radar for some people, but proved himself absolutely because he looked nutty for Dallas. He was arguably the best Ana and Moira in the league in 2021. Is that arguable? Or was he just hands down the best Ana and Moira? I think he was hands down the best. What do you think, chat? Was there somebody else? I think he was the best Ana and Moira player in 2021. So, the best Ana was Twilight. The thing with Twilight, though, again, is that it's hard to rate somebody the best when they don't play all the time and you don't get to see them in a massive sample size. I think, in my opinion, having pondered it a little bit now, between people like Alarm played nuts, Izyaki's Ana was incredible, and then, yeah, like you're saying, Twilight as well. I think I would still probably give it to Fielder, in my opinion. But it is a bit debatable. But anyway, in my opinion, you can differ if you like, but in my opinion, I think he had the best Ana and Moira of 2021. So that's obviously absolute elite performances. And you could reasonably argue for him being higher than 10th on my list, maybe taking the leap over Luffy and Badoshan, even though he doesn't have the same, championship IGLing win as somebody like Badoshan, doesn't have the same length of career as either of them, but he achieved, his talent was so good, and he still won 2 titles, right? 2 titles? He won the Summer Showdown for Paris, and then the May Melee for Dallas, right? Is that correct? I think that's correct. Yeah? People not confirming, but I think that's right. Anyway, so he's got 2 stage titles, so he's still, got more accomplishments in a tougher time period than Luffy. So, but perhaps I have been unfair, actually. Now, thinking back at it, perhaps Fielder should really be in the 9th position and Luffy in 10th. But anyway, he was held down towards the bottom of the list because of his short career in Overwatch League so far. Some people that I had through 11th to 15th, I had Kariv in 11th. Kariv hasn't really reached the peaks of anybody above him on my list. He had one stage where he looked nuts on Ana, and Ana's certainly his best hero. But I think that the period of time in which you could argue he was the best at Ana was only a few weeks out of his career, which is different to everybody above him on the list. Like, everybody in the top 10 has higher peaks than that, or longer peaks than that. So Kariv really is in there because he's got an extremely long career. He's been just a solid performer throughout a very long career, just especially on Ana being pretty excellent. So to me, that puts him in like the 11th position. I didn't think he'd get over the top. What was Luffy's peak? I haven't really seen him play. I think his absolute peak was probably during that stage 3 with Shanghai in 2019. But his relative peak was probably quite a bit earlier when he was playing for Kongdu, because the rest of the field wasn't as good and Luffy was really good at the time. I'm not exactly sure when his relative peak would have been, but you know, the skill increases over time, and I think he was certainly at his absolute peak during that stage 3 with Shanghai. And then I actually had Unko in 12th as well, because the people that you're going over there are like, I'll just read out the rest of my list, was Unko, Gangnam Jin, Creative, and Iris. And Gangnam Jin, Creative, and Iris are like, they've been good for like a year towards the end, and sometimes only on one hero. So I thought, if we're talking like for 2 years before Overwatch League, for 2016 and 2017, Unko was the second best flex support in the world. So he's had, admittedly, when the game is much less competitive, but he was the second best flex support before out. So that he actually makes it on my list as the only non-Korean support as well. So Boombox, come the fuck on, guys. I did consider Boombox, Shaz, those kind of players too, but you can't have a player whose peak was, I don't even know what Boombox's peak was. Maybe like, top 5? Was he top 5 in 2018? Would he have been like 5th in 2018? I don't know. Iris, I have Iris at 15th on my list. I really don't even have him that high compared to, you know, like other people. You could have ranked him at 12th, I don't know. But to me, the 12th through 15th spots just have no hope of getting higher during Overwatch 1 because they haven't played enough. And also for somebody like Iris, I was only really, really impressed with his Batiste. And that still, I mean, he still didn't have the best Batiste in the league. So you can't be getting into the top 10 based on that. I just don't understand what your argument would even be for that. Yeah, and I did think about Shaz as well, but I don't think that Shaz... Do you mean top 4 in terms of like actual performance, or he finished top 4 every season? Because that's not even true. They finished 5th, didn't they? Wasn't it like 5th and then 5th again or something like that? But yeah, I feel very good about my top 10. And 11 through 15, I was just like, there really aren't that many good options, but I'm going to try and order them in some kind of way. What about Haxel's Brig? Yeah, sorry, Apples, I rolled your moderator. So, yeah, that was my top 10 list. So, if you're interested in taking a look at it, I'll pop it on the screen for you. Hello? I'm trying to zoom in, but it won't zoom in. Zoom? There we go. Okay. What is this? Get the webcam out the way. So, there's my top 10. That was my top 10. Having reviewed it a little further, I probably would put Fielder above Luffy. I'm not sure I would put Fielder above Badoshan, because like I said, Badoshan's career was really long before the Overwatch League, and he won the first championship whilst IGLing. I think that's a massive accomplishment. But I think I'd probably swap 9 and 10 at this point, but I'm not going to do it because this was the list that I actually came up with. And then these are just... who the fuck knows? But yeah, there you go. So I was pretty happy with this top 10. I think I would stand by it aside from the small swap there. The top 15, though, is just nonsense, in my opinion. Once you get outside of the top like 11, it just gets crazy.